Welcome back to Inside the Philippines, the channel where we sit down with the men and women who left everything they knew behind and started again on the other side of the world. Some of those stories end in ruin. You know that if you've been here a while, but not all of them do. And today's is one of the ones that surprised even us. His name is Reg. He's 57, from Nottingham, in the English Midlands. And for 35 years he stood behind a butcher's counter with a knife in his hand and a queue out the door on a Saturday. Blunt fella. Warm, though. The kind who calls you duck and means it. Life knocked him about a bit. We'll let him tell you how. And when it did, he did what a lot of you have thought about doing at 3 in the morning. He sold up, packed a case, and flew to a small island in the central Visayas to see if a man could start over at his age. And here's the part that makes this one different. One day, 2 people got on a plane in England and flew halfway round the world to drag him back home. They were absolutely certain they were coming to rescue him. They'd made up their minds about what they'd find before the wheels ever left the runway. They were wrong about nearly all of it. That's all I'll say. Before we get into it, if you're watching, do us a favor and drop a comment telling us where in the world you are right now. We read them. It genuinely makes our day. Share your own story. If you've lived something like this, hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't. Because these are the stories the algorithm forgets. Right? Here's Reg. In his own words, I'll tell you the thing people get wrong about butchers. They think it's about the meat. It isn't. It's about the people. 35 years I stood behind that counter on a road in Nottingham, and I knew half the city by their order. Mrs. Fenwick, 2 lamb chops every Thursday, trimmed close. She didn't like the fat. The Polish lads down the road, whole shoulders of pork for a christening. Widowers who bought 1 sausage and stood there 20 minutes because I was the only person they'd speak to all day. I fed them. I remembered their names. That was the job. And I was good at it. So don't let anyone tell you I'm a man who doesn't understand people. I do. I understood everyone except, apparently, the woman I married. We were together 26 years, me and Sandra. 2 kids. Danny first, then our Kelly, 2 years after. And I'm not going to sit here and paint myself a saint because I wasn't. I worked Saturdays. I worked most days, if I'm honest. You don't run a counter on bank holidays and come home a poet. I missed things. Sports days, a few of them. But I never once thought the ground was going to open up. And then, one Tuesday, she sat me down at our own kitchen table and told me it was over, and that she'd been telling the kids her version of it for a good while before she told me anything at all. That's the bit that finished me. Not the marriage. The marriage was tired, I'll grant you. It was the kids. Danny was 24 by then, Kelly 22. Grown, technically. And they sided with their mum, which, fine, that's what you do, ain't it? But it went further than sides. It went quiet. Danny stopped answering. Kelly would text at Christmas, 1 line, "Hope you're well, Dad," like I was a dentist she owed money to. I'd see them on Facebook. Kelly got engaged, and I found out from a photo. There's a specific kind of cold, that. Watching your own children's lives through a little glowing screen like you're a stranger, pressed up against the glass of your own house. The divorce cost me the house, and about half of everything else. I'm not crying about the money. I did all right, in the end. Sold my share of the shop to the young lad I'd trained. Sold the last bits of the marriage. And when the dust cleared, I had about £160,000 sat in an account, which for a butcher from Nottingham is a fortune. And I want to be dead honest with you about that number because it matters later. 160 grand. That was my whole life. rendered down. 35 years of early mornings and cold hands in one line on a bank statement. And nobody to spend it with. Nobody to leave it to who'd take my call. I want to tell you, I coped like a grown man. I didn't. I sat in a rented flat in Sherwood for the best part of a year, with the telly on for company and a fridge full of nothing, which is a bleak thing for a butcher, an empty fridge. I lost weight. I got Marty with everyone. My mate Trev dragged me to the pub, and I'd sit there and go through the motions and think, is this it then? Is this the rest of it? 56 years old, sat in a Weatherspoons with a lukewarm ale, watching men my age who still had wives to be annoyed by. I'll be straight with you about how the Philippines came into it, because it's less romantic than you'd think. It was a lad off the internet, not a woman. Get that idea out of your head right now. That's not this story. It was a bloke called Dave who'd been a plumber in Derby and moved to somewhere called Bohol. And he made these daft little videos about his life out there, feeding the neighbors' chickens, 50 pence for a beer, the sea like something off a postcard. And I watched about 400 of them at 2 in the morning like an idiot. And one night I thought, well, what exactly is keeping me here? Nothing. That was the answer. Nothing was keeping me here. Now, I'd read the horror stories too. Don't think I hadn't. You can't spend 10 minutes looking into this without tripping over some poor sod who sent his pension to a girl he'd never met, or built a house on land he could never own, and lost the lot. I read every one of them. I made a list, actually. I'm a list man, always have been. You don't run a shop otherwise. Rules for myself. Things I would not do no matter what. And I stuck that list in my wallet, folded up behind my bank card. And I want you to remember that it existed, because there were a few nights out there where that little bit of paper was the only thing standing between me and being one of the stories on Dave's channel. The lowest I got, before any of this, I'll tell you, because it puts the rest in its place. It was a Sunday. I'd cooked myself a proper roast, out of habit more than hunger. Beef, I'd got a lovely bit of topside off the lad who bought my shop, still gave me mate's rates, and I plated it up for one, and I sat there in that Sherwood flat, with a full plate of the thing I'd spent my whole life selling, and I couldn't eat it. Just looked at it. A butcher who couldn't face his own dinner. And I thought, this is a man with nothing to do tomorrow that matters to anybody. That's the truth of what broke me. More than the divorce, more than the money. It was being unnecessary. You spend 35 years being the fella people rely on for their Christmas dinner and their kid's birthday party. And then one day, the phone doesn't ring, and you realize the whole thing was rented, and the lease is up. I told nobody I was going. Who was I going to tell? I sold the flat's furniture. I put the money where I could get at it slowly and not all at once. And on a wet Wednesday in March I flew from East Midlands to Manila, with one case and a folded-up list. 56 going on 57. With no plan beyond a month in a rented room to see if I could breathe out there. I remember standing in the queue at passport control in Manila, absolutely drenched in sweat, the second I stepped off the plane. This wall of heat, and thinking, you daft old sod. What have you done? And then thinking, well, nobody at home's going to notice either way. That's the part that still gets me, saying it out loud. Nobody was going to notice. I had 2 children alive and well in England, and I got on a plane to the far side of the earth, and it never occurred to me that either of them would so much as look up. They noticed eventually, just not for the reasons you'd hope. The domestic flight from Manila down to Tagbilaran was on a little propeller thing that rattled like my dad's old Cortina. and when it dropped through the cloud, there was Bohol underneath it. Green, proper green, greener than anything's allowed to be in Nottingham, with the sea round it going 3 different colors at once. I had my forehead against the window like a kid. Grown man, 56, gawping. Bohol, if you don't know it, is a fair-sized island in the central Visayas, and the little island hooked onto the bottom of it is called Panglao, and that's where the beaches are. Alona Beach. That's the one Dave the plumber always filmed. I got a taxi from the airport, and the driver talked the whole way. Lovely fella. Told me about his cousin in Luton. Everyone out there's got a cousin somewhere in England, and he dropped me in a barangay. That's a little village, a neighborhood. A few minutes back from the tourist strip, where I'd rented a room off a woman I'd only ever emailed. First thing that hits you is the heat. And I've said that already, so I'll not go on. Second thing is the noise. Nobody warns you about the noise. Roosters at 4 in the morning, not one, dozens, the whole barangay of them competing. And they don't crow at dawn like the storybooks. They crow all night, whenever the fancy takes them. Karaoke coming through the walls till 2. A dog somewhere having a row with another dog. Motorbikes, tricycles. These little motorcycles with a sidecar bolted on, they're the taxis. They buzz about like angry wasps. I lay under a mosquito net that first night thinking, I have made a terrible mistake. I have paid good money to be kept awake in a sauna. And then the sun came up, and I walked down to the water, and I stopped thinking that, I'll not do the whole beach poet routine on you, but I stood on Alona with my trousers rolled up like the pale English idiot I was, and the water was warm as a bath, and a lad went past selling sunglasses and didn't even bother trying it on with me, just grinned and said, "Morning, boss," and something in my chest that had been clenched up tight for about 2 years just let go a bit. First time in a long time I'd stood somewhere and not felt like I was waiting for the next bad phone call. I found my own place within a fortnight. A little house on the edge of the barangay, part concrete, part nipa. That's the woven palm stuff, with a tin roof and a bit of yard, and a mango tree that dropped fruit on the roof like gunshots. Rent was 12,000 pesos a month. That's about 170 quid for a whole house. I stood in the empty front room and laughed out loud, because you couldn't rent a garage in Nottingham for that. Those first weeks I was on my own more than I'd like to admit. The novelty of a place doesn't fill an evening. I'd buy a couple of San Miguel's from the Sari Sari store on the corner. That's the little shop that's really just somebody's front window with sweets and shampoo in single sachets and beer in a cooler. And I'd sit on my step and watch the barangay go about itself. Kids playing basketball on a hoop nailed to a coconut palm, no net, played till it was pitch dark, and then played by feel. Old women with more sense than me sat fanning themselves, and I felt, some of those nights, exactly as alone as I had in Sherwood, just warmer and further from anyone who'd notice. Don't let anyone sell you the idea that a plane ticket fixes loneliness. It just changes the wallpaper. What fixes it is slower than that, and it starts with someone knowing your name. The woman at the Sari Sari learned mine first. Then the tricycle lads at the end of the road, who'd shout, "Reg! Boss Reg!" and take the mick out of my accent. Little by little I stopped being a Kano and started being a bloke who lived there. And a lot of that, more than I understood at the time, ran through the Carinderia 2 doors down. Which brings me to Lorna, and I want to do it properly. Because the way these stories usually go, this is the bit where the pretty young thing appears, and the poor old fool loses his head. That is not what happened. I need you to hear that. There was a carinderia 2 doors down from the Sari Sari store. A carinderia's a little eating house, a few plastic tables, pots of whatever's been cooked that morning kept warm. You point at what you want. And I ate there because I can't cook rice to save my life. And it was 40 pesos for a plate of food, 60 with a bit of fish, which is under a pound. The woman who ran it was called Lorna. And Lorna was not 22. Lorna was 49, near enough my own age, a widow, built like a woman who'd worked hard her whole life, with reading glasses pushed up on her head, and a way of running that little kitchen like a sergeant major. 3 staff, all family. She'd have your food in front of you before you'd sat down, and she'd tell you off if you left the vegetables. First few weeks, she barely spoke to me beyond the food. You want rice? Not even a question. She'd clocked me as another Kano. That's what they call us, a Westerner. And it comes with a price tag attached in most people's heads. The assumption you're made of money. I could see her deciding what I was. Fair enough. I was deciding what she was, and all. What got us talking, of all things, was the meat. She had a bit of pork on the go one day, and she'd butchered it herself and made a proper hash of the cut. And I couldn't help it. 35 years behind a counter, I said, "You're fighting that, love. You're going against the grain. Turn it." And she gave me a look that could curdle milk. But the next day there was a slab of pork belly on the counter, and she pointed at it and said, "Show me then, Mr. Butcher." Half a challenge, half a test. So I showed her, boned it out, scored the skin, showed her how to portion it so it went further, because in a place like that, everything's about going further, making the peso stretch. And she watched with her arms folded, and at the end she grunted, which I came to learn was Lorna for not bad. And she gave me a plate of it cooked that evening on the house, and sat down across from me for the first time while I ate it. We didn't fall in love that night. I want to be honest about the pace of it, because the pace is the whole point. We became, I don't know, 2 middle-aged people who'd both been through it, sat at a plastic table, finding out the other one was all right. She'd lost her husband 6 years before. Fishing boat, a storm, they never found much. She'd raised the kids and the grandkids and half the street on the back of that little carinderia ever since. She wasn't looking for a rescuer. If anything, she looked at me like I was one more thing that might need managing. That folded-up list was still behind my bank card, and every rule on it was about money and land and never being daft. Not one rule on it said anything about a widow with reading glasses telling me off for leaving my greens. I hadn't thought to write a rule for that. Maybe I should have, but not for the reason you're thinking. Let me tell you about that list, because it's time. Folded up bit of paper, behind the bank card, sweat soft by then. I'd written it in the flat in Sherwood at 2 in the morning after a fortnight of horror stories, and it said, in my terrible handwriting, 1. Never put your name to land you can't own. 2. Never hand over one big lump of money for anything. 3. Rent, don't build. 4. Meet the family before your heart does. 5. If it feels like a rescue, it's a trap for both of you. 6. Learn the place. Don't be a tourist for the rest of your life. 6 rules. And I read the papers of men who broke every one of them and lost houses, pensions, the lot. So I held to mine like a banister. That's not me being clever. That's me being frightened and using the fright properly for once. Life in the barangay settled into a shape. I'd be up with the roosters whether I liked it or not, walk down for a pandesal, little bread rolls, warm, They come round on a bike with a horn, and a coffee so sweet it'd take the enamel off your teeth. I bought a second-hand motorbike, a little Honda, 110cc, 45,000 pesos, about 630 quid, and I paid for it out of the drawdown, not the savings. And I'll come back to that distinction because it turned out to matter. I learned to ride the habal-habal roads. That's the local motorbike taxi thing. But I did my own after a while. Roosters, mud, a water buffalo stood in the middle of the road like he owned it, which he did, frankly. And I spent a great deal of my time, one way or another, near that carinderia. I started helping, not in a grand way. I'd fix the wonky leg on a table. I showed her supplier was robbing her blind on the pork, bringing her the cheap end and charging her middle. I went with her to the wet market in Tagbilaran one Saturday, into the BQ Mall area where the proper market is, and I stood at the meat stalls, and I could see in about 4 seconds who was straight and who wasn't, and I got her a better price and a better cut, and she saved maybe 300 pesos on the week, which doesn't sound like much until you live on what she lived on. She looked at me different after that. Not soft, just like I might be useful rather than expensive. Out there, that's a bigger compliment than you'd think. I made a point of learning the place, and that was Rule 6, earning its keep. I picked up bits of Bisaya. That's the language down there, not the Tagalog they speak up in Manila. And the moment you try, even badly, even if you say the wrong thing and a whole sari-sari store falls about laughing, something shifts. Salamat, thank you. Maayong buntag, good morning. Pilani, how much is this? I got the price of fish, right, because I asked in their words instead of pointing like a lord. I went to the Sunday Mass some weeks, not because I'm a religious man. I'm really not, but because that's where the barangay is on a Sunday. And standing at the back of a hot little church while the whole street sang was a way of saying, I'm one of you, or trying to be. They're Catholic to the bone out there, 85% of the country, and the God talk that peppers everything. God is good. It's a blessing, if it's God's will. I learned isn't a performance. It's genuinely how a lot of them hold a hard life together. You can be cynical about it from a bar stool with Malcolm. Or you can shut up and let people believe what gets them through. I chose the second one, and slowly the barangay decided I was all right. Not rich all right. All right, all right. The captain, every barangay's got a captain, a sort of elected village headman, nodded at me in the street, and out there that's practically a knighthood. I fixed a neighbor's dodgy freezer seal for the price of a beer. I never flashed money, never bought around for the whole bar to be the big Kano, because I'd read what that does. You become a bank with legs, and everyone's polite to a bank, but nobody respects it. I wanted to be a man, not a machine that dispenses pesos. I need to explain something about the culture, because if I don't, you'll misread everything that comes after. There's a thing called utang na loob, debt of gratitude. It's not a bad thing in itself. It's the glue that holds these communities together. The idea that if someone helps you, you carry that. You owe it back somehow, forever really. Beautiful thing when it's mutual. But it cuts the other way, and all. A Kano with money is assumed to be a walking cash point of gratitude, someone whose whole purpose is to help, and the family that lands one is expected to make the most of it. That's not always greed. Sometimes it's just survival, wearing the face of family. Poverty makes people ask for things. It doesn't always make them liars. Holding both of those in your head at once is the entire trick, and most fellas can't do it. They decide everyone's a saint or everyone's a scammer, and either way, they get done. Lorna never asked me for a penny in those first months. That's the truth. If anything, she'd try to give me things, an extra bit of fish, a mango off the tree. So when the first proper test came, it wasn't from her at all. The chest freezer packed in. Old thing, been dying for months, and when it went, it took a load of her stock with it, and that's a catastrophe for a carinderia. No cold storage. You can't buy ahead. You can't keep anything. Your margins vanish. She didn't ask me. She sat at the table that night doing sums on the back of a receipt with her glasses down her nose, and I could see the fear on her. The real kind. The kind I'd worn myself in that flat. Now the old me, the daft rescuer me, would have pulled out a wad and said, "Here you go, love. Get yourself a new kitchen while you're at it." And the list in my wallet said, "No. Rule 2. Never one big lump." So I did something different. I said, "I'm not giving you money." She bristled. Proud, that woman, so proud. But I said, "I'll buy the freezer, and it's mine. It stops in my name, and you use it. And if it ever goes wrong between us, I take the freezer, and we're square." A business thing. A tool, not a gift. Cost me 20,000 pesos for a decent one from the appliance shop in Tagbilaran. About 280 quid. And I paid the shop directly. Delivered to her kitchen. Receipt in my hand. And do you know, she respected that more than if I'd been Father Christmas. Because it wasn't charity, and it wasn't a hook, and it left us both standing up straight. A partnership, sort of. My freezer, her kitchen. Nobody owed anybody their soul. That's the whole game. That freezer. That's this entire story in one appliance if you want it. It would have been so easy to be generous, and so much better to be fair. We got closer after that. Slowly, like two people our age ought to. She'd shut the carinderia, and we'd take the little Honda out to a quiet bit of coast, past Alona, where the tourists don't go, and share a couple of warm San Miguels, and watch the sun go down. And she'd tell me about her husband, and I'd tell her about Sandra, and about Danny and Kelly, and the not answering, and the photos through the glass. She was the first person I'd told all of it to. She didn't try to fix it. She just said, "They are angry because they are hurt. Hurt is a debt too. One day, someone pays it." And I didn't understand what she meant by that. Not then. I remember riding home that night, tipsy on 2 beers like a lightweight, roosters starting up already, and thinking, I'm happy. Quietly, awkwardly, at 56, in a place I couldn't have found on a map a year before, I was happy. And happiness, out there, has a way of getting noticed. Word travels in a barangay faster than any broadband. The Kano at Lorna's is a good one. The Kano at Lorna's has money and no sense of what to do with it. That kind of talk. It wasn't long before the asking started. And not from her. I met the family properly at a fiesta. Every barangay has one, it's patron saint's day, and the whole place goes up. Lechon on a spit, a pig roasted whole and turning over coals since dawn, tables in the street, a sound system loud enough to loosen your fillings, everyone in their best. Lorna sat me at the family table, which out there means something, it's not nothing, and I met the lot of them. Her 2 grown daughters, Mylene and Rose, Rose's husband, a tribe of grandkids, a brother, Boy. Half the men out there are nicknamed Boy. It's not a comment on their age. Cousins I never did get straight. And they were, to a soul, warm to me. Fed me till I couldn't move. Laughed at my Nottingham accent. Made me say duck over and over because they thought it was the funniest thing they'd ever heard. And somewhere between the Lechon and the 3rd San Miguel, the asks began. Gentle. Always gentle. That's how it's done. Never a demand. Always a door left open for you to be generous through. Boy got to me first. Lovely fella. Genuinely. But Boy had a plan. Boy always had a plan. Piggery. Raise pigs. Sell to the Carinderias and the Lechon men. Can't lose. And did I know he only needed a bit of capital to get it going? 150,000 pesos. And I, being a butcher, would understand the meat trade better than anyone. About 2,100 quid. And he was right that I understood it. I understood it well enough to know that his numbers were a dream, and his feed costs would eat him alive, and that a bit of capital to get going is the 4 most expensive words in any language. I said, Boy, if you draw me up the real figures, feed, vet, the lot, I'll look at them with you like a business, proper. He never drew them up, because it was never really a business. It was a hope with my wallet attached. He wasn't a bad man for asking. I wasn't a mug for saying no. Both things sat at that table together. Fine. The bigger one came from a cousin, through Lorna, and this was the one that could have ended me. There was a lot of land coming up. Not far off Alona. Back a bit, but near enough the tourists that in 10 years it'd be gold. 1.2 million pesos. Call it 17,000 pound. And the pitch, and it's a good pitch. It's landed 1,000 men. Was that Lorna could buy it, in her name, since a foreigner can't own land in the Philippines, that's the actual law, and I could build us a little place on it, and we'd have a home and a nest egg. And wasn't it sensible at our age to think about the future? And I want you to know I sat with that one, because I did love her by then, quietly, and part of me wanted to say yes, just to prove I trusted her. That's the trap, see? It doesn't feel like greed getting you. It feels like love asking you to be brave. Rule 1. Never put your name to land you can't own. And its shadow. Never buy land in her name either, because it isn't yours, it's hers. And the day it goes wrong, you're a squatter on your own dream. Not because she'd cheat me. I didn't think she would. Because I'd read too many men who'd have sworn the same about the woman who eventually did. 17 grand, and I'd have nothing but a receipt with her name on it, and a house I couldn't legally keep. So I said no, and I did it the hard way, the honest way. I sat Lorna down, just us, and I told her about the list, actually got it out of my wallet, and unfolded the daft, sweaty thing and read it to her. And I said, Love, it's not about trusting you. It's about a man my age not being able to afford to be wrong. If we've got a future, it can't stand on a thing the law says isn't mine. She was quiet a long time. Then she said, Good. Just that. Good. The ones who say yes to everything, they run away in 2 years. You are planning to stay. She'd been watching to see if I'd be daft. My saying no was the thing that made her trust me. I've thought about that 100 times since. There was one more, and this one wasn't family. This one was an Englishman, and it was nastier for it. Fella called Malcolm, an expat, been out there 15 years, held court at a bar on the Strip with a face like a dropped pie, and he took a shine to me as fresh meat. Had a scheme, beachfront lots, a little resort, get in now, mate, ground floor, all these Filipino partners lined up, just needed a few investors with real money to make it fly. Wanted a chunk, 30, 40 grand. And Malcolm was clever, because Malcolm didn't come at me like the family did, all warmth and hope. Malcolm came at me like a fellow white man who understood how things really worked out here. All winks. And that's a powerful drug when you're lonely and you want someone from home to tell you you're one of the smart ones. I nearly liked him enough to do it. That's the honest bit, not the scheme. I could smell the scheme, no permits, No papers I could see. Trust me, doing all the heavy lifting. It was the loneliness, the wanting a mate. But I'd fed enough men across a counter to know the difference between a bloke who likes you and a bloke who likes your money. And Malcolm couldn't hide it once you looked. I bought him a beer, said it wasn't for me, and I steered well clear after. Heard about a year later the whole thing collapsed and took 2 Australians and a German down with it. There, but for the grace. So, no land, no lump, no piggery, no resort. And here's the thing nobody tells you. Saying no over and over doesn't cost you the life. It buys you the life. Every no I said, I stayed. I was still there, still am. But I'll tell you what, saying yes to none of it didn't fix. The nights. Lorna had her own house, her own family. And we weren't the kind to shack up, not at our age, not there, not with the church next door keeping count. So I'd ride home to my little Nipa house and lie under the net and hear other people's karaoke and think about Danny and Kelly. There was a birthday out there that near did me in. 57th. Lorna found out I hadn't said, I don't make a fuss. And she and the daughters cooked, and Boy brought his terrible guitar, and half the barangay squeezed into that carinderia and sang to me, this daft, loud, tuneless, happy birthday, with a sparkler stuck in a bit of cassava cake, and I sat there grinning like a fool. And then I went home and sat on my step and cried like I hadn't since the flat. Because it was the best birthday I'd had in a decade, and there wasn't a single person there who'd known me as a young man. No one who remembered Danny being born. No one who'd been at my own dad's funeral. A whole warm room of people who loved the man I was now, and not one who'd loved the man I used to be. That's a specific loneliness they don't warn you about. The loneliness of being happy among people who only have the last chapter of you. One had a good life. I still had a hole in it shaped exactly like my kids. And it was that hole, not a scam, not a scheme, nothing anyone did to me, that reached all the way back to England and set the whole thing off. Here's how it happened, and it's almost funny when you lay it out, except it wasn't at the time. 2 things landed at once, back home, and between them they built a monster that never existed. First, the bank. I'd been moving money out in dribs and drabs through one of those transfer apps. Never the savings, the drawdown, but the app doesn't know that. And I'd sent a run of transfers to a Philippine account to sort the freezer and the bike and the deposit on the house, and my UK bank's fraud team flagged it. Old man, unusual pattern, money going to the Philippines. And when they couldn't reach me, my English mobile was in a drawer, dead, they rang the emergency contact on the account, which, because I'd never updated it in 20 years, was R. Kelly. Second thing, Facebook. Rose, Lorna's daughter, had tagged me in a great daft album from the Fiesta. Me at the family table, red as a post box, a San Miguel in my hand, and Lorna's arm through mine, and about 40 Filipinos I couldn't name grinning round me. And Kelly, who hadn't sent me more than a Christmas line in 3 years, saw it. Saw her dad, who she thought was quietly rotting in a flat in Sherwood, sat in a foreign country with a woman she'd never heard of, and a family she'd never met. On the same week the bank rang her about money draining out to that exact country. You can see it, can't you? From where she sat, you can absolutely see it. Every horror story she'd ever have heard. Dad's lost his mind. Dad's been got at. Some woman's reeled him in, and she's bleeding him dry, and he's too far gone to know it. And by the time we do something, there'll be nothing left. She wasn't stupid to think it. That's the part one have to keep saying, even now. She wasn't stupid. She was looking at real dots and drawing the line that 99 times out of 100 is the right line. She rang Danny. First time the two of them had properly talked about me in years, and it was to say Dad's in trouble. And then, one night out there, my phone lit up. I'd charged it, some instinct. And it was a video call from Kelly, and my heart nearly came out of my mouth, because she never called. And I thought, someone's died. Somebody had, in a way. The dad she thought she knew. I answered it, sat on the step of my little house with the mango tree dropping fruit like gunfire, and there was my girl's face, older, tired, and beside her Danny, my lad, jaw set the way his granddad's used to. And before I could get a word out, Kelly said, "Dad, who is she?" Not hello. Who is she and how much have you given her? I tried. God, I tried. I said, "Sit down, let me tell you. It's not what you think. She's called Lorna. She runs a little—" "Dad, they do this." Danny now, flat, like he was talking a jumper off a ledge. "They find blokes exactly like you, divorced, on their own, bit of money. It's a script, Dad. You're in a script. And the terrible thing is, he wasn't wrong that the script exists. I'd read the script. I'd built my whole daft life out there around not being in the script. But you try explaining that down a wobbling video call to two people who've already watched the ending in their heads. Every calm thing I said sounded exactly like what a man in the script would say. She's not like that. Script. It's my money. I know what I'm doing. Script. I've been careful. I've got rules." And Kelly actually laughed, this cracked little laugh, and said, "Rules. Dad? You've got a list?" Because I'd said it. I'd mentioned the list. And out of my mouth in that moment, it sounded like exactly the pathetic thing a conned old man clings to. I got angry. I'm not proud of it. I said, "Oh, so now you're bothered. Now there's money in it. You can be bothered to pick up the phone. 3 years of nout. And now you ring me like I'm a—" And I stopped. Because Kelly's face had gone. And I knew I'd hit the exact bruise, the one we all had, the years of silence, and I'd used it as a weapon instead of a wound. There was a horrible quiet. Then Danny said, very level, "We've booked flights. We land in Cebu on the 14th, then over to you. We're coming to sort this out, and we're bringing you home, Dad. This has gone far enough." They'd already booked. They hadn't rung to ask. They'd rung to inform me of my rescue. My children, who wouldn't answer a text for 3 years, had spent money they didn't really have on flights to the far side of the earth. Because they were frightened for me. And I sat there furious and gutted, and underneath it, in a place I didn't want to look at, absolutely made up. Because they were coming. Whatever the reason. After all this time, they were getting on a plane for me. I didn't tell Lorna for 2 days. When I did, she didn't flinch. She said, "Then we will feed them." Like that solved it. They come thinking bad things. Let them see. You cannot argue a person out of a fear, Reg. You can only show them the truth and let them be ashamed by themselves. Wisest thing anyone said in the whole business, that. The days before they landed were the worst waiting of my life, and I've waited on some bad news in my time. I couldn't settle. I cleaned that little house till it shone, which was daft. They weren't coming to inspect the grouting. Except, of course, they were, in a way. That's exactly what they were coming to do. I kept rehearsing what I'd say, and it kept coming out either angry or begging, and neither's any good. Lorna watched me pace and finally sat me down and said, "Stop making the speech. A speech is what a guilty man brings. You have nothing to sell them. Just let them look." And she was right. Every time I'd tried to argue my case down that video call, it had sounded like a con. The one thing I couldn't fake was a life. So I decided I'd not perform it. I'd just live it in front of them for a week and let it be whatever it was. I told Boy and the daughters too, and I was half afraid they'd put on a show. Lay it on thick to impress the rich Kano's family, because that instinct's there, the saving face, the wanting to look good. But Lorna had a quiet word, and they were themselves, thank God. Rose said, "We will just be normal. Normal is the truth." And normal is exactly what disarmed my two in the end. Not a performance of a good life, a real one, with its dropped mangoes and its 4 a.m. roosters and its plastic tables, going on being real whether they approved of it or not. The 14th came. I rode to the little airport in Tagbilaran to meet them with my heart going like a hammer, this pale, nervous old butcher on a 110cc Honda, about to hand my children the one thing they hadn't come for. The truth. They came through the doors of that little airport looking wrecked. 20-odd hours of flying, gray with it, and braced. You could see it on them. They'd come loaded for a fight, ready for a broken old man in a hovel and a hard woman with her hand out. Kelly hugged me stiff, like you'd hug a stranger at a funeral. Danny shook my hand and looked past me for the villain of the story. I could read them like a Saturday cue. I didn't argue on the way. Lorna's advice. I just drove them, got a proper taxi, not the bike. And I let Bohol do the talking. And I watched the first crack go across their certainty about 5 minutes in, when the driver, who I knew, leaned round and said, "You are Reg's children. He talks about you always, always. He is good, man. Your father. Everybody here. We love him." And Kelly looked at me like she'd been slapped, because that is not what you say about a sad, conned old fool. That is what you say about a man who belongs somewhere. Then my house. They'd pictured a shack. And it's not grand, my place. It's a little nippa and concrete thing. But it's clean, and it's mine in the ways that matter. And I'd made it right over the months. I'd had a proper bathroom put in, tiled it, put in a decent water tank so the pressure worked, done the floor. Maybe 40,000 pesos all in over a year, 560 quid, and I showed them the receipts for even that because I'd kept everything. A little front room with my books. A photo of the two of them, young, on the shelf, that I'd carried halfway round the world. Kelly stood in front of that photo a long time and didn't say anything. Then the reckoning proper, and I decided to do it plainly, like stock take. I sat them at my table, and I got out everything. The bank statements, the savings, the whole £160,000, sat in England, in my name, untouched, every penny, earning its bit of interest exactly where I'd left it. "That's the money you flew out to save," I said. "It's all there. Count it." I showed them what I actually lived on. The drawdown, 800 a month, less than I'd spend in Nottingham on nothing. I showed them the rent, the freezer receipt, my name on it. I told them about Boy, and the piggery I'd said no to, the land I'd said no to, Malcolm and his resort I'd said no to. I unfolded the list, the daft, sweaty, sacred list, and I put it on the table in front of my son, and I said, "Read it. This is the con I'm supposedly too far gone to see. I wrote it before I got on the plane." Danny read it. My hard, careful lad, who does something clever with insurance, and thinks his old man's a soft touch. He read all 6 rules, and his hands started shaking, and he put it down. And he said, in this small voice I hadn't heard since he was a boy, "You've been more careful than I would have been, Dad." And that broke something open in him, because they'd flown 4,000 miles, sure they were the sensible ones coming to save the fool. And the fool had a spreadsheet. Kelly didn't come round on the money. Kelly came round on Lorna. We went to the Carinderia that evening, and Lorna, bless her, she'd been up since dawn, had done a spread, proper Boholano food, and she wouldn't take a peso for it. And when Kelly, still suspicious, still fishing, asked her straight, over the rice, "So, what is it you want from my dad?" The whole table went quiet. Lorna put her spoon down and said, "I want him to eat his vegetables and not die before me. That is all. His money is his problem, not mine. I have my own Carinderia. I fed my children on it before he came, and I will feed them after, if God decides." And she picked her spoon back up. And Kelly, my Kelly, who'd been braced like a fist since the airport, just crumpled. Started crying at a plastic table in a barangay in the central Visayas because she'd flown round the world to rescue her father from a monster, and the monster had just told her to eat up. And then it all came out, the real thing, the thing that was never about the Philippines at all, the divorce, the silence. Kelly saying, through it, "Mom told us you didn't want us, Dad, that you'd chosen the shop over us, that you were glad to be shot." And me saying, "No, God, no, never. I thought you didn't want me. I watched your engagement on a screen. Love." And Danny sat there gray, realizing there had been two versions of the same 10 years, and nobody had ever put them in the same room. Hurt is a debt too, Lorna had said. One day, someone pays it. This was the paying. Round a table, over Lechon, 4,000 miles from where the debt was run up. The hardest talk was with Danny, on the third day, just the two of us, on a bench up by the church, looking down at the water. He said the thing he'd really come to say, which wasn't about Lorna at all. He said, "I thought if we didn't come now, one day we'd get a phone call, and it'd be too late, and I'd never have—" And he couldn't finish it, my hard lad, doing something clever with insurance. And I understood then that the flight wasn't an accusation. It was a boy who'd already lost his dad once, to a divorce and a silence and a version his mum had painted, and who wasn't going to sit in England and lose him a second time to a scam without at least getting on a plane. He'd rather be wrong and here than right, and too late. When you put it that way, his coming out braced for a fight was the most loving thing either of my kids had done in years. I'd just been too busy being insulted to see it. I told him about the years from my side, not to score points, just so there was one place in the world where both versions of the last decade had been said out loud in the same air. He listened. He didn't agree with all of it. There were things I'd got wrong as a dad, and he named them, fair and square. The missed sports days. The way I'd let the silence harden because I was too proud to keep ringing a phone that didn't answer. And I took it because it was true. That's the other half of doing it right, the half that's got nothing to do with pesos. You take the bit that's yours. I won't pretend it all healed in one night, because it didn't. And I promised you honesty. There were harder talks. Danny stayed guarded a day or two longer, kept quietly checking, I could tell, half expecting the trick to reveal itself, and part of me didn't blame him, because his fear had been decent. It had been love wearing a frightened face, and you don't unlearn 4,000 miles of dread over one good dinner. But by the end of the week, they weren't talking about bringing me home. They were asking when I'd come and visit theirs. That was a while back now. Let me tell you where it all sits today, because that matters more than the pretty ending, and because I promised you I'd not sell you a fairy tale. The money's still where it was. All of it. I never touched the 160 grand, and I don't intend to unless I'm ill or old in a way I'm not yet. I live on the drawdown, careful as ever. I'm a butcher, we count. It's in the blood. No land in my name. No land in her name that I paid for. The freezer's still going strong, still mine, still humming away in Lorna's kitchen, and there's a joke between us now that if I ever misbehave, she loses her cold storage. And honestly, it's a better prenup than any lawyer ever drew up. Me and Lorna we're together, in the way two people our age are together when they've both buried a life already. I didn't marry her, and I might not. There's no rush, and there's things to think about. She's got family, I've got money, and pretending those two facts don't sit in the room is how men get done. We talk about them out loud. That's the trick. Not trust that everything's fine. Just never stop being able to say the awkward thing over the rice. Danny and Kelly, I speak to every week now. Every week. Video call on a Sunday. My time evening. Theirs afternoon. And I've got a grandson I'd never held. Kelly's little lad. And now he knows my face. Calls me Grandad Reg. Thinks the roosters going off behind me is the best thing he's ever heard. Danny came back out on his own last year. No rescue mission this time, just a fortnight. And he sat in Malcolm's old bar with me, and we talked more in 2 weeks than in the 20 years before. He apologized for the call. I told him not to. A son who books a flight because he's frightened for his dad. That's not a thing you apologize for. That's the thing I'd waited 3 years to see and mistook for an attack because it arrived in armor. And I'll give you the caveats straight, because this channel's better than lies. I'm still lonely some nights, and no widow, and no barangay, and no reconciled kids fully fill the hole a man digs for himself over 60-odd years. Things could still go wrong out here. Lorna could get ill. I could. The peso could turn. A law could change. A family need could come along one day, so real and so large that all my clever rules feel like cruelty. I don't know how I'll be if that day comes. I hope I hold the line. I can't promise I will. Kelly's fear wasn't stupid then, and it isn't stupid now. It's just that being careful is a thing you do every single day, not a battle you win once. The list's still in my wallet. I still read it. But here's the wisdom. If you want it from a 57-year-old butcher who got most of it wrong and this one thing right, it was never about finding the perfect woman or the perfect country. It was about being the kind of man you don't have to rescue. Say no to the land. Say no to the lump. Rent, don't build. Meet the family before your heart does. And keep the money where the law says it's yours, not because she's a liar, but because loving someone should never mean handing them the power to end you. Do those, and you get to keep both, the love and yourself. Skip them, and you usually lose the both and all. 57 I am. Divorced, once, badly. A butcher from Nottingham, with cold hands and a folded-up list, sat under a mango tree at the far end of the world, with his kids back and his money safe, and his vegetables eaten. That's me. Turns out you can start again. You just have to be daft enough to go, and careful enough to stay. And that's Reg, a man his own children flew across the world to rescue, only to find there was nothing to rescue him from. We wanted to bring you this one because it's the story the algorithm buries. It's easy to make a video about the man who lost everything to a scam. It's harder and rarer and truer to show you the man who did it right, who was lonely and hopeful and reckless enough to leave, but disciplined enough to keep his feet under him. There was no villain here. Reg's kids weren't fools. Their fear was love in a frightened coat. Lorna wasn't a scammer. She was a widow with a carinderia and her own pride. And Reg wasn't a mark. He was just a bloke who'd read the warnings and had the good sense to write himself 6 rules and the backbone to keep them, even when love asked him to be brave and stupid instead. If this one moved you, or if you've lived some piece of it, tell us in the comments where you're watching from and what you'd have done. Share it with someone who needs to hear that it doesn't always end in ruin. Like this video and subscribe, because we've got more of these, the ruinous ones and the redemptive ones both, and every single one of them has something in it worth carrying home. Thank you for spending this time with us. Take care of yourselves, take care of the people who'd get on a plane for you, and we'll see you next time, here, inside the Philippines.